been a privilege, and it has a very important function because it enables the reintegration into society for those that are to be reintegrated in a supervised and managed way. There are always pressures, and I thought it would be worthwhile quoting the pressures that they have in California, since that seems to be what we're modelling our new laws on. 70% of those released on parole will return within 3 years to the prison system there. 90% of those are breached on their parole, even if it's a technical breach, and that takes them back to prison. Nothing to do with whether the particular breach would have attracted a prison sentence, just a breach of parole. So examples that have been given are somebody who's been told that they can't drink while they're on parole. The officer turns up at home, they've been drinking, they go back to prison. Drinking's not an offence in any other respect, but that was a condition of the parole. In California, one parole officer for how many former inmates or people who are on parole? 1,000. One parole officer per 1,000. And this is the system that we want to emulate. In California, the Department of Finance spends 17.4% of its budget on corrections and rehabilitation. Do you know what the education budget is? 0.8%.
Oh my God.
And this is, I don't know why we think that this is just such an amazing idea. I think that we have to listen to what we're being told about how this is going to work in practice. But the one issue that nobody has responded to yet is how we've chosen these particular ranges of offences. I'm really, really happy that, what's his name, Mr Madoff, got 150 years. Bernie Madoff, 150 years. Now, there's a crime where it was motivated by greed. It was deliberate. He didn't get drunk and accidentally remove a whole lot of money out of people's back pockets. And the fact that he didn't do it at a point of a gun, or didn't do it with a knife, or didn't do it with the threat of physical injury, why is he better than somebody who has, been addicted to drugs or ended up in a situation where he has acted on the spur of the moment in a situation where they're not thinking things through? Because a lot of the crimes that we're talking about in the violence space are actually crimes that are not premeditated. They're often crimes that occur because of the circumstances that people find themselves in. Bernie Madoff didn't find himself in the situation where he could rip millions and millions of dollars off innocent friends who are no longer his friends. But the reality is that we say that these are different. So let's look at the range of crimes. What about sexual harassment? Now, we know about sexual harassment. It's incredibly damaging, particularly for young, vulnerable women who meet older men who are in a position of power. And they might, for example, come here to Parliament and they might find themselves in the situation where, for example, they come here as a student on a student group, and they might get told by their tutor, look, don't complain about that MP who sexually harassed you, because if you do that, then we'll end up in a situation where we'll have to have the visits to Wellington cancelled, and we don't want that. So just suck it up and just, put it to one side. We'll try and avoid that particular MP. Would you like me to name that one, Mr Garrett? Because I think that the point that I want to make is that we've been selective about the range of offences. And I think that we actually have to think very, very seriously about white-collar crime in the context of where deterrence works. And I don't know why members of the government don't get this. If we want to operate a system that deters serious crime, then put the deterrent where it will work. Put it where somebody is very clear about the choice that they're making in terms of the crime that they're committing in relation to the risk of getting caught and the consequences of getting caught should they be convicted of the offence. And that is what white-collar crime is all about. If we really wanted to do something about deterrence, then we would have offences and we would have the mechanisms for enforcing those activities. Mr. Chairman.
Honourable Leanne Dalziel.
Mr. Chairman, we would have all of those things in place if we were genuinely serious about deterrence. Now, just picking up on the point that was made around the quote from the Select Committee report back, and yes, it is quoting from the Minority Report, but the specific quote that my colleague Clayton Cosgrove referred to was an extract from the Cabinet paper, so there is no issue there with respect to what the Minister was saying. But then the Department of Corrections, when it was reporting on prison bed forecasts, says there is an implicit assumption that the bill will have no deterrent impact. Well, if her own department thinks that there is an implicit assumption, that's an actual quote, then I can't understand why she would be arguing that her own department is not taking that particular point of view. Is the Minister denying that that was a genuine quote? Well, perhaps if we could have the entire quote, because I can't see anything else other than the very clear statement, there is an implicit assumption that the bill will have no deterrent impact. And I guess that's around the fact that they're not budgeting for an increase in bed numbers, which I presume, I assume that the Minister's going to address that when she next addresses the House. The other thing that I want to come back to is this whole question of the discretion that sits with the judges. And in this particular case, because it's a section that deals with parole, the question of the ability for the parole board to actually look at individual cases. And of course this discretion is taken away from judges. Now, what I haven't heard the Minister respond to, and I think this is probably the most serious one, and it was raised by the Reverend Ron Givens when he was over here, and that is a very important one. And the two issues, the danger to prison officers and the danger to police officers. It is clear that more people desperate to escape that third strike conviction has resulted in more police officers being killed. It has. I mean, the Minister can shake her head, but perhaps she'd like to respond to that issue, because that is the evidence that has been given to us. And the other one is the question of the prison officers. If somebody is never going to get out of prison, what on earth does that do to their mental well-being? And this was the point that we had made to us, is that the significant percentage already have mental illness when they go into the prison. But for those who know there is no hope, there is no ability for redemption, no capacity to rejoin the community, no matter what changes they make to their life, what on earth is the incentive to actually sit down and address those underlying issues? It seems to me that that is something that the Minister hasn't taken into account and is putting more and more corrections officers at risk, which is a tragedy which we could avoid. And it's the same with the police officers as well. In every single jurisdiction where this has occurred, people are desperately trying to avoid being arrested for that third strike, and you also have the situation where people are essentially ground down into a state of mental illness that prevents them from actually participating in anything within the prison context, and essentially they become even more violent and create a greater risk for those that are supposedly looking after people in a humane containment environment within our prison system. And I think that's probably the most serious matter that the Minister hasn't addressed at all in any part of the debate. And I think that the risks are serious and they ought to be taken seriously by her, and she ought to respond to the issues as they have been raised. So I think that those issues around both the general sentencing capacity, taking away. It's essentially politicising justice by taking the discretion away from the judges. It's politicising a system of parole which is about reintegration. How is people supposed to be reintegrated if the parole is removed from the second strike?